On the night of July 19th, Ukraine launched more than 400 drones toward Moscow and the surrounding region. By dawn, Russian officials claimed that hundreds had been intercepted. On paper, it looked like a defensive victory. But that was only the most visible result. Across the region, radar stations came alive. Airports began restricting operations. Security units were redirected, and the pressure kept building. One radar crew was still assessing an earlier track when new contacts entered the next sector. Every interceptor that left its launcher meant one fewer missile for the drones still approaching. As the number of tracks increased, commanders had less time to classify each one, and less freedom to decide which sector to protect next. So why send more than 400 drones into a defense network built to destroy many of them? Because the drones that were shot down may not have failed. They may have already completed the first part of the mission. They forced Russia to spend missiles, radar time, and command attention, all before the next waves arrived. At 9:30 p.m. local time, the first engines came to life at launch sites across Ukraine. Ground crews stepped back as one drone after another left the ground and disappeared into the darkness. This was not a single formation heading toward Moscow. Hundreds of long-range drones had been divided into staggered groups. Some turned north, others spread east and west, widening the operation with every mile. Russian radar crews would not see one formation. They would see fragments of an attack arriving sector by sector. But the launch sequence was already under pressure. One group was running several minutes behind schedule. The first wave was already nearly 20 miles ahead, and every minute of delay widened the gap between them. The gap was still growing. Hold the drones back, and the first wave would reach Russian airspace with less pressure behind it. Launch them late, and the attack could begin to separate. The order came quickly. Launch. The delayed group climbed into the night. By then, dozens of drones were already moving toward Russian airspace. More followed behind them. Then, another wave lifted off. There were no explosions yet. No sirens had sounded over Moscow. No interceptor missiles were rising into the night. Only small drones moving through the darkness, separated by distance, altitude, and time. Once airborne, there would be no second attempt. If the first wave was detected too early, the later groups would arrive against a defense network already awake. But the sequence held. The delayed group settled into position behind the first wave. Within the hour, the first contacts would appear on Russian radar, and Moscow would be forced to react before the main pressure had even arrived. Less than an hour after the first launches, a faint contact appeared on a Russian radar screen, then another. Within seconds, 7 weak returns appeared near the outer edge of the sector. 12 seconds later, a second station confirmed the tracks. 3 were already moving toward the sector boundary. The quiet part of the night was over. Operators compared speed, altitude, and direction with data from nearby stations. One track vanished as noise. The other 6 held steady. The tracks were real, their purpose was not. Strike drones, decoys, or drones already drifting after losing their navigation signals. One contact held its course for 30 seconds. Then it broke away from the cluster and continued northeast. The leading track was closing on the sector boundary. The time available to classify it was shrinking with every radar sweep. That movement forced a decision. Fire too early, and an expensive interceptor could be wasted on a decoy. Wait too long, and a real strike drone could cross into the next sector before another battery was ready. The command network assigned the northeast track to an air defense battery. Its commander had less than 20 seconds. Jam it first, or authorize a missile before identification was complete. Electronic warfare units attacked the navigation signals. 2 contacts began to drift. The northeast track did not. Target assigned. The fire control radar locked on. A firing solution appeared. Launch authorized. Seconds later, an interceptor climbed into the darkness. 1 missile had left the launcher. 1 fewer remained for the contacts still approaching. The track disappeared, but no one could yet confirm why. It might have been destroyed, lost inside the interference, or dropped below radar coverage. Before that assessment was complete, the fire control crew had to shift its attention to another track entering the sector. Then 5 new contacts appeared. The first engagement had not been assessed. The next target was already nearing the boundary, and 1 interceptor was already gone. Every new return entered the same chain: detect, verify, classify, assign, engage, assess. A single decision cycle could consume nearly a minute. Russia was no longer working through one cycle at a time. It was being forced to carry several at once. The first approach corridors had already done their job. One sector fired within seconds. Another tried electronic warfare first. Farther east, Russian crews took longer to classify and respond. Ukrainian planners had expected that difference. Nearly 40 minutes after launch, the second group reached its first turn point. Several drones changed course. One group moved away from the sector that had reacted fastest. Another reduced speed and waited outside a second corridor for 3 more minutes. Ahead of them, Russian crews were still working through the first engagements. One track had vanished without a confirmed result. One battery had already fired. Other contacts were still waiting to be classified. Then the delayed group turned in. It entered through a corridor where Russian crews were expected to respond more slowly, while their attention remained divided across the first wave. None of this was improvised. The routes, delays, and turn points had been programmed before takeoff. The later groups did not need new instructions from the ground. They were following a plan built around how Russia was likely to react. Some of the earlier drones had already been destroyed, but they had not disappeared without effect. They had triggered launch orders, revealed which batteries fired first, and kept Russian crews from finishing earlier engagements. The first wave had not opened an empty corridor. It had narrowed Russia's decision window. Now the attack was changing shape. Different routes, different timing, different pressure. By the time Russian crews began resolving the engagements created by the first layer, the next was already entering. Wave after wave continued for hours. At 2:10 a.m., the pressure finally began to fall. New contacts appeared less often. Radar screens that had carried overlapping tracks now showed only isolated returns. One sector reported no new targets for nearly 8 minutes. Then, 12. Russian crews began closing out earlier engagements. Batteries checked their remaining missiles. Operators reviewed tracks that had vanished under jamming or interception. The network was still alert, but it was no longer fighting for every second. At one command post, the tactical picture had dropped from more than 20 active tracks to fewer than 5. The remaining contacts were moving away from protected sectors or losing altitude. For the first time since the opening wave, commanders had enough time to review the picture instead of reacting to it. The worst appeared to be over. Then a new voice broke into the command net. It was not an air defense unit. The first report mentioned smoke near a rail terminal outside Moscow. The second reported flames beside a loading platform. Minutes later, the station stopped all movement. Nothing on the current air picture could explain the fire already burning below. The fire spread toward a loading area, holding fuel, spare parts, and cargo waiting for morning transport. Within minutes, the terminal stopped all movement. Trains remained beneath red signals. Approaching trucks were turned back, and emergency crews took control of the access roads. One fire had frozen an entire transport node. The command problem changed instantly. Russian commanders had been tracking drones. Now they had to track blocked rail lines, delayed cargo, and the growing cost of every lost hour. The fire did not need to destroy the entire station. It only needed to stop it. And while emergency crews moved toward the terminal, later groups of drones were still crossing the darkness. Moscow had not reached the end of the operation. It had reached the moment when the attack moved beyond the air defense network above the city and into the logistics system beneath it. New warnings began appearing around Moscow's outer districts. One track moved toward an industrial zone. 2 more approached a fuel depot. Another crossed near a railway corridor, while 3 uncertain contacts remained between a logistics center and the southern edge of the city. None had to reach a target to matter. Russia had to treat every one of them as a potential threat until it could be ruled out. Inside the command post, orders began moving faster than units could carry them out. One mobile battery was sent east to cover the industrial district. Electronic warfare teams were told to hold the southern tracks under jamming, while fire crews remained committed to the burning rail terminal. Then, a new warning appeared near the fuel depot. The eastern battery had been moving for less than 2 minutes when its order was reversed. Turn south. Protect the fuel storage site. That decision left the eastern approach with less coverage. At the same time, commanders had to choose between firing at a drone nearing the railway line or waiting for electronic warfare to push it off course. The nearest launcher had 4 missiles remaining. 8 tracks were still moving. They waited 3 more seconds. The track did not turn. Launch authorized. 1 interceptor left the launcher. 3 remained. On the ground, police blocked the fastest road to the fuel depot so emergency vehicles could pass. Military trucks carrying supplies were diverted onto a route nearly 14 miles longer. Then smoke was reported near a second logistics site. A fire unit already moving south was ordered to turn back, but the road behind it had just been closed. The command post now faced 2 fires, 8 moving tracks, and fewer mobile units than it had 10 minutes earlier. Every new priority forced another one aside, leaving another sector with less coverage, less time, or fewer options. Russia was still shooting down drones, but its freedom to concentrate resources was shrinking. Protect the center and the outer districts carried more risk. Move a battery east and the south weakened. Close a road for safety and supply traffic slowed. The decisions made inside the command post were now visible across Moscow. Stopped convoys, rerouted trucks, blocked rail lines, and warehouses that could no longer operate normally. At 3:20 a.m., a fuel convoy was stopped 3 miles short of the rail terminal and redirected onto a 14-mile detour. By the time it reached the outer gate, it was 23 minutes late. The terminal had already stopped accepting new cargo. 6 freight trains remained trapped inside the yard. 2 more waited beyond the signal line. Nearly 80 rail cars carrying fuel drums, vehicle parts, ammunition crates, and repair equipment could not move forward. Workers began separating urgent cargo from everything that could wait, but there was nowhere to send it. The southern loading platform had lost power. A warehouse beside the terminal remained sealed after smoke entered its ventilation system. Forklifts stood idle while more trucks arrived outside the gate. Within 30 minutes, the line stretched nearly 2 miles. Fuel trucks could not remain parked beside ammunition carriers. Civilian drivers needed new instructions. Security teams had to inspect every vehicle before allowing it near the damaged terminal. Then the Eastern Storage District received another air raid warning. Operations stopped immediately. Nothing had been destroyed there yet. But warehouse doors closed. Loading crews moved into shelters. 3 outbound convoys missed their departure windows. Fire crews preparing to leave the rail terminal were ordered to remain in place. A second emergency team was redirected from the northern suburbs, adding another 18 minutes to its journey. By now, the cost of the attack could be seen without looking at a radar screen. It was visible in engines left running beside blocked roads, in freight cars sitting beneath red signals, in cargo that had arrived but could not be unloaded. Russia was still intercepting drones. But one late convoy delayed 1 train. 1 stopped train blocked the next loading window. That missed window pushed another convoy off schedule. The delays were no longer isolated. They were moving through the network together. An interceptor had left its launcher. A mobile battery had turned south. A road had been closed for emergency vehicles. A fuel convoy had arrived 23 minutes late. 8 freight trains had stopped inside or outside the terminal. None of those events stood alone. 1 drone drew a missile. That missile could not be used against the group behind it. 1 warning pulled a battery toward the fuel district, leaving less coverage elsewhere. 1 road closure helped firefighters reach the terminal, but forced military trucks onto a 14-mile detour. The same pressure kept moving through the system. Now the scale of the operation began to make sense. More than 400 drones did not need to reach Moscow. Their numbers forced Russia to repeat the same chain hundreds of times. Detect, verify, classify, assign, jam, or fire. Then assess the result before the next contact arrived. The different routes prevented Russia from concentrating everything along one corridor. The long duration prevented crews from finishing one wave and returning to normal before another appeared. Even destroyed drones could still shape what followed. They activated sensors, drew interceptors, held batteries in place, and revealed which sectors responded first. Then the targets on the ground pulled more systems into the fight. A rail terminal called in firefighters and railway officials. A fuel warning drew security units and emergency crews. Closed roads disrupted traffic. Delayed trains pushed loading schedules backward. The physical targets mattered, but the larger target was the response system connecting them. Moscow was forced to detect, choose, redirect, contain, block, repair, and restart. All while new warnings continued to arrive. The drones were not only attacking Moscow, They were attacking the cost and complexity of defending it. As dawn approached, Russia could count how many drones had been shot down. But that was only one way to measure what the night had done. By dawn, Moscow was still not fully at rest. Smoke remained above the rail terminal. Fire crews continued working around the loading platforms. Teams collected debris while police inspected roads before reopening them. Freight trains waited beneath red signals. Trucks remained parked outside warehouses. Air defense crews stayed at their stations because no commander could be certain the final wave had passed. By morning, both sides could point to different results. Russia could count the drones it detected, disrupted, and destroyed. It could count the sites that remained protected and the individual engagements its crews had won. Those were real tactical results. A large share of the drones may have been stopped in the sky. Russian radar, electronic warfare, and air defense units had remained operational through hours of pressure. Ukraine could measure something else: how many defensive, emergency, and transport systems had been pulled into the response, and how long they remained there. None of those figures appeared in an interception total, but all of them shaped what Moscow could do next. Russia may have stopped most of the drones before they reached their targets. That did not automatically mean the broader operation had failed. The attack did not prove that Moscow's defenses had collapsed. The harder question was endurance. How long could one city keep its radar, air defenses, emergency crews, roads, and logistics network under pressure if operations like this kept returning? Russia could count the drones it shot down. Ukraine could count the systems it forced to react. In a war of attrition, those numbers never mean the same thing. Which measure matters more in a campaign like this? The drones destroyed or the systems forced to react? Tell us which number matters more, and subscribe for the next operational breakdown.